The golden blade struck the obsidian paving stones with a deafening crack, releasing a shockwave of radiant light that shattered the ancient masonry into thousands of floating fragments. Vaelen knelt amidst the settling dust, his heavy black armor scarred by dozens of burning light marks, his breathing heavy and ragged inside his thorny helm. Across the grand courtyard of the floating zenith, the wing-bound entity known as the Luminary hovered in silence, her 6 golden arms moving in slow, rhythmic choreography while her blinding halo cast harsh shadows across the desolate architecture. She did not speak with words, but her presence radiated an unyielding command that reverberated inside Vaelen's mind, demanding total surrender. In her eyes, the dark night was merely a relic of a forgotten age, an unwelcome intruder trying to disturb the eternal order of her light-drenched realm. Yet, as the glowing golden sword vibrated with pure kinetic energy, Vaelen tightened his grip upon his own dark, iron-forged broadsword. The umbral lantern strapped to his belt flickered with an eerie cyan flame, whispering cold truths that only those bound to the shadowy veil could hear. He knew that falling here meant more than simple death. It meant the complete erasure of his memory and the endless servitude of his soul to the light's overwhelming perfection. The luminary raised her main sword once more, the weapon gathering brilliant solar tendrils that hissed against the atmospheric pressure of the high-altitude temple. Clouds drifted below them like a silent sea of white foam, completely obscuring the ruined world below. Vaelen slowly pushed himself upward, forcing his aching limbs to obey. The thorny crown welded to his iron visor gleamed with faint blue sparks as he activated the dormant power within his soul-bound vessel. The air grew frigid, freezing the golden dust particles mid-air. He locked his glowing blue gaze upon the celestial sovereign above him. Every instinct warned him that her strength vastly surpassed his own, yet his pride, forged through decades of dark pilgrimage, refused to yield an inch of ground. "You offer salvation wrapped in tyrant's light," Vaelen growled, his voice muffled by the thick steel of his helmet, resonant with iron resolve. "I would rather watch this holy sky shatter than bow before a golden lie." With a sudden burst of shadowy speed, Vaelen lunged forward, his cloak billowing behind him like a cloud of dark smoke. The luminary responded instantly, unleashing a devastating beam of concentrated energy directly toward his chest. Instead of dodging, Vaelen raised his lantern, unleashing an opposing wave of specter fire that clashed violently against the celestial beam. The collision created an explosive vortex of pure golden and icy blue light, swallowing both combatants whole as the ground beneath them began to disintegrate into the endless abyss below. The blinding explosion tore open the floor of the zenith, plunging both Vaelen and the luminary through a cascading sea of shattered marble and radiant debris. Wind howled in Vaelen's ears as he free fell through the dense, cloud-choked sky, his heavy steel armor pulling him rapidly downward toward the uncharted abyss below the floating city. Above him, the divine entity spread her massive golden wings, effortlessly carving through the air with fluid grace while keeping her luminous eyes locked onto her falling opponent. She raised her secondary blades, preparing to execute a final, descending strike while Vaelen remained helpless in midair. However, Vaelen was far from defenseless. Unsheathing the hooked dagger from his waist, he struck the side of a massive, falling pillar, using the friction to pivot his body in mid-fall. The blue flame of his umbral lantern flared violently, projecting phantom chains that latched onto the drifting stone blocks around him. With a powerful tug, he hoisted himself onto a giant floating slab of ancient masonry, regaining his footing amidst the chaotic freefall. As he stabilized his posture, a strange sensation washed over him. The air around them began to thicken, turning into a murky violet haze that smelled of ancient rot and forgotten secrets. They had fallen below the golden clouds and entered the Veil of the Forgotten Reach, a hidden realm beneath the sky citadel that was never meant to see the light of day. Suspended in this twilight zone were thousands of sprawling, inverted towers, bound together by gargantuan iron chains that stretched into absolute darkness. The luminary paused her descent, her golden glow dimming slightly as if repelled by the unnatural atmosphere of the Reach. For the first time, a subtle rift appeared in her flawless golden facade. Her 6 arms twitched in precise, agitated motions as if detecting an unseen threat lurking within the murky shadows. Ancient runes carved into the sides of the floating, inverted towers began to glow with a sickly green illumination, echoing with distant, whispering voices that spoke in forgotten tongue. Vaelen recognized those symbols. They were the mark of the Void Watchers, an ancient order that had locked away something so powerful that even the gods had feared its existence. The luminary had pursued him here to execute him, but she had unwittingly stepped into a realm where her radiant light had no absolute dominion. Looking up at her hovering form, Vaelen raised his sword in a silent challenge. The divine ruler swept downward, her golden blades cutting through the murky air like streaks of lightning. Vaelen planted his feet firmly upon the falling platform, preparing to harness the shadowy power of the Reach to turn the tide of an impossible battle. The luminary's radiant swords struck Vaelen's parrying blade with catastrophic force, sending shockwaves through the inverted ruins around them. The platform they stood upon slammed into the side of a massive central spire, coming to a sudden, grinding halt. Dust and ancient glyphs rained down as the two warriors remained locked in a contest of pure strength. The divine entity unleashed a dazzling surge of solar heat, attempting to incinerate Vaelen's armor from the inside out, but the cold umbral energy coursing through his lantern neutralized the burning glare, wrapping his body in a protective shell of dark frost. Vaelen kicked hard against her golden greaves, forcing her back just enough to break the lock. He spun his broadsword with lethal precision, targeting the joint of her lower right wing. A spray of golden ichor erupted into the air as his blade found its mark, causing the divine sovereign to let out a piercing, harmonic screech that vibrated through the stones. She retreated several paces, hovering above a glowing circular dais built into the side of the inverted spire. As the luminary's blood splashed onto the dais, the ancient stone floor reacted violently. The sickly green runes flamed to life, swirling into a glowing vortex that revealed a hidden chamber beneath the dais. Within the chamber stood a massive obsidian sarcophagus, sealed by dozens of thick, shimmering chains forged from both light and shadow. Vaelen's eyes widened behind his helm as he recognized the seal. The legend was true. The floating citadel above was not built as a palace for the gods, but as a colossal prison to keep this very sarcophagus buried deep within the sky. The luminary's demeanor shifted instantly. Her aggressive focus on Vaelen turned into pure panic as she realized what her blood had awakened. She raised her remaining arms, attempting to channel her celestial magic to reseal the dais before the ancient binding broke completely. But the dark energy leaking from the sarcophagus was already hungry, extending pitch-black tendrils that wrapped around her ankle, leeching her golden power into the dark void. Vaelen realized that he was now standing at a crucial crossroads. He could allow the entity inside the sarcophagus to consume his golden enemy, but doing so might unleash a threat far worse upon the mortal world below. The luminary struggled against the shadowy tendrils, her divine composure entirely shattered as she cast a desperate glance toward the dark knight who had forced her into this trap. With his hand hovering over his flickering lantern, Vaelen stepped closer to the edge of the dais. The ancient secrets of the Sky Realm were finally revealing themselves, and the line between holy divine guardian and dark monster was quickly blurring into complete obscurity. The pitch-black tendrils writhing from the sarcophagus multiplied rapidly, creeping up the luminary's golden armor like living oil. Her radiant aura flickered erratically, dimming into a pale, sickly yellow as the ancient entity beneath the floor drained her divine essence. She fought valiantly, her golden blades swinging in frantic arcs to sever the dark tendrils, but for every shadow she sliced away, 3 more rose from the widening cracks in the dais. Vaelen watched the desperate struggle, his mind racing under his heavy iron helmet. He had fought the luminary to a standstill out of pride and survival, but he was no mindless monster. If the primordial horror trapped inside that obsidian coffin broke free, neither the Sky Citadel nor the mortal realms below would survive its ravenous hunger. The luminary met his glowing blue visor with her eyes, her previous arrogance replaced by a silent, agonizing plea for assistance. Suppressing his deep-seated hatred for the divine tyrants, Vaelen made his choice. He raised his umbral lantern high into the air, driving its base violently into the center of the glowing runes on the dais. Umbral surge, he roared, channeling the full, unbridled force of his soul lantern directly into the ground. A wave of icy cyan fire blasted outward from the lantern, clashing against the dark tendrils with absolute coldness. The sudden drop in temperature froze the liquid shadows mid-motion, shattering them into brittle glass like shards. Seizing the momentary reprieve, Vaelen leapt forward and thrust his greatsword into the central lock of the dais, using his heavy body weight to force the mechanism shut before more shadows could escape. The luminary collapsed to one knee, her golden wings tattered and her breath coming in heavy, metallic gasps. The divine ruler and the dark knight stood side by side atop the vibrating floor of the spire, temporarily bound by a shared survival instinct. Without speaking a word, the celestial entity extended one of her golden palms toward Vaelen, infusing a faint spark of holy light into his battle-scarred broadsword, mending the hairline fractures in its steel. Their silent alliance was short-lived, however. A deep, seismic tremor shuddered through the entire inverted spire. The giant chains holding the floating towers began to snap one by one with thunderous cracks that echoed across the cloudless expanse. The force beneath the sarcophagus was not defeated, it was merely enraged by their intervention. The colossal obsidian coffin groaned as its lid shifted several inches, releasing a blinding shockwave of chaotic violet light that blew both warriors off the ledge and into the swirling storm of the abyss below. Plunging deeper into the roaring tempest below the spire, Vaelen and the luminary found themselves enveloped in a terrifying vortex of atmospheric pressure and raw, uncontainable void magic. Massive chunks of broken architectural ruins flew past them in the howling gale, threatening to crush them into dust. The sky above had completely turned into an abyss of swirling violet clouds, illuminated by jagged strikes of dark lightning that struck the floating debris around them. The luminary used her remaining strength to glide alongside Vaelen, using her golden light to deflect the larger fragments of falling stone. Her posture was no longer majestic, but determined. She recognized that the Dark Knight possessed the unique power needed to seal the terror they had inadvertently disturbed. Pointing her golden sword downward toward the epicenter of the storm, she signaled toward a massive, floating orb of dark crystalline glass suspended in the center of the vortex, the heart of the ancient prison. Vaelen nodded, steering his falling trajectory toward the giant glass sphere. Inside the translucent walls of the orb, a colossal, multi-limbed silhouette was visibly thrashing against its restraints, its burning crimson eyes glaring through the thick crystal. The seal was weakening rapidly with every second that passed. If the entity broke free from the sphere, its dark magic would destroy the atmospheric balance of the entire world. As they drew closer to the sphere, 4 massive shadow guardians materialized from the violent clouds around them. These monstrous wraiths, forged from pure void energy and armed with towering scythes, swooped down to protect the awakening horror inside the crystal core. The luminary immediately intercepted 2 of the specters, her 6 golden blades turning into a whirlwind of blinding holy slashes that cut through the darkness with desperate fury. Vaelen braced himself as the remaining 2 wraiths charged directly toward him. Activating the full power of his lantern, he absorbed the dark energy from the surrounding storm into his blade, coating his iron sword with a lethal combination of umbral frost and divine golden light. With a roar of defiance, he swung his heavy sword, cleaving through the first shadow wraith in a single, devastating strike. The second wraith lunged for his throat, its cold scythe grazing his shoulder armor. Vaelen grabbed the blade with his gauntleted hand, pulled the creature close, and rammed his glowing lantern into its chest, disintegrating the shadow into harmless mist. With the path cleared, Vaelen landed squarely on top of the floating glass sphere, his heavy boots echoing like thunder against the cracking surface. Standing atop the vibrating surface of the massive glass sphere, Vaelen could feel the immense, ancient power pulsating beneath his feet. The red-eyed entity trapped within slammed its massive fists against the interior wall of the glass, causing hairline fractures to spread quickly across the structure. The luminary landed beside him, her wings glowing with the last remnants of her divine energy. She raised her golden blade, aligning it above the central keyhole of the prison sphere, but she paused, looking directly at Vaelen. To complete the sealing ritual and lock the ancient evil away forever, 2 equal and opposite forces were required. The absolute light of the divine celestial sovereign, and the dark coldness of an umbral knight's soul. However, the energy required for the ritual was so immense that whoever executed the final strike would have their physical form bound to the core forever, becoming the eternal sentinel of the void. The luminary raised her blade, preparing to sacrifice herself to seal the core, but Vaelen stepped forward and placed his heavy iron gauntlet over her hand, stopping her movement. He looked up at the vast, shattered sky above them, a world that had cast him out and labeled him a monster long ago. Yet, despite his bitter path, he knew that his dark soul was forged specifically for this eternal burden, while her divine light was needed to guide the world above through the coming darkness. "Return to your sky citadel," Vaelen's voice echoed softly from behind his steel visor, devoid of any anger or pride. "Your light belongs to the world above. My shadow belongs in the deep." Before the luminary could respond, Vaelen grabbed his broadsword with both hands, channeled every ounce of his soul lantern's icy flame into the steel, and plunged the blade deep into the core of the glass sphere alongside her golden sword. A miraculous explosion of dual light, brilliant gold fused with deep icy cyan, erupted from the center of the sphere, blinding everything in sight. The violent storm instantly ceased. The howling winds died down, and the sky began to clear, revealing a peaceful blue horizon above the clouds. The luminary was thrown back by the gentle shockwave, landing safely on a floating platform as she watched the giant glass sphere solidify into an unbreakable, glowing gemstone that began its slow descent into the deepest trench of the earth. Inside the glowing crystal core, the silhouette of Vaelen stood motionless, his sword embedded into the ancient seal, forever keeping the primordial dark at bay. The luminary knelt on the floating stone, bowing her head in quiet respect to the Dark Knight who had sacrificed everything to become the eternal protector of the world.